Welcome to the very first episode of Sperb Herbs Chinese Singles. This is a weekly podcast that will be looking at individual Chinese herbs. Every week we're going to have a different herb that we go way in depth on. And this is episode 1. We're going to be talking about Gou Qi Zi in the Chinese, also known as Goji or Goji berries. And if you like your Latinate, Lychee fructus, or as we're going to get into it, Lychee barbarum. I am Dr. Greg Sperber. I am your host for this, and let's get going. And right off the bat, I'd love to tell you that we are sponsored by Your Name Could Go right here. All you need to do is contact me at the email address at the end of this program, and we would love to talk about sponsoring this, for having this sponsored by you. So before we get into Gou Qi Zi proper, I wanted to talk about something that I first learned as the new drug curve. I learned that in a pharmacology class in Western medicine. In business, it's called the hype curve or the Gardner hype curve. And that's usually applied to technology, but in marketing, used in marketing a lot too. I'm kind of rebranding it a little bit, called the rediscovered herb curve. I've tweaked it a little bit as we go along. So we're going to talk about where I've tweaked it and what it means. But here, the herb that I always think about when I think about this curve is kombucha, because when I was in Chinese medical school, this was really hot. Everyone had kombucha. They were fermenting it in their kitchens, and it was the hot herb all over the place. And it got really, really hyped. Didn't quite get as high as goji berries, I think. I think goji berries have become much more mainstream than kombucha, but kombucha got up there. And then what happened right at the height of its hype, people started dying because it was home fermentation. There was contaminants. It smelled funny, and people drank it anyways and died from contamination, or at least those are some of the stories that hit. And so instantly kombucha went off the face of the planet. You couldn't find it. No one talked about it. It was just done. This whole process probably took a couple years to go through it. And then here we are, maybe 15, 20 years later, and you can go down and you can buy kombucha at any health food store. And it's kind of come back. It's nowhere near the hype or the level it was, I think, when I was in Chinese medical school. But it did come back, and it's much more mainstream, and it has maintained sort of a steady presence. And so I think that rapid increase in hype, the rapid decrease, and then sort of a mainstreaming sort of low level use of it. That's sort of the hype curve or the rediscovered herb curve, I think, in a nutshell. And the reason why I call it the rediscovered herb curve is because these herbs have been around for a long time and have been used for thousands of years by indigenous peoples. And so it's not that we're discovering it, we're rediscovering it and applying our modern business hype machinery to it. And so that's why I like to call it the rediscovered herb curve. You can. I have a picture of this herb curve on the website. So all you have to do is go to www.sperbsherbs.com, and you can look at episode 1 for single herbs, Sperbs Herbs Single Herbs, and you will be able to see a picture of this. So basically there's 5 parts to it, and it starts with rediscovery. It peaks at peak of inflated expectations. It goes down into the trough of disillusionment. It comes up slightly with the slope of enlightenment and a slight decline of use. That's my little tweak on it, is that herbs will kind of slightly decline in use over time as opposed to plateauing and remaining relatively stable. So some of these terms are the terms from Gardner research, and so and some of them I've tweaked a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about these 5 parts. So the first one is rediscovery. Gardner called this the technology trigger because it was really applied to technology. So when a new technology comes around, bam, that starts this whole curve. So I'm saying when rediscovery happens. And so how does rediscovery happen? I don't know. There seems to be a bit of an increased awareness. Like someone brings out and does an article somewhere, and then there's a little bit of interest in it, and then I think some of the nutraceutical companies get involved and start pushing it, and then the retailers get involved and start pushing it, and so and then there's more articles, and then there's books, and I think that's how this happens with herbs. And it keeps going up and up until it reaches the peak of inflated expectations. And so early publicity produces a number of success stories. Basically, people who are taking this are feeling great, and there's some good stories about how great this is and all that sort of stuff. So that piques the interest in people. And then it decreases, the trough of disillusionment. Interest wanes as experiments and implementations fail to deliver. Like I said, with kombucha, we often see where people have gotten hurt. So you often hear, like with some herbs that are misused, you might hear liver problems, or like I said, in kombucha, there was actually reported deaths due to improper fermentation of the kombucha. So when those hit, the disillusionment came fast and furious. I think sort of a slow level of disillusionment often happens when scientists start looking at each of the herbs and go, hey, this really isn't doing everything that other people said they were doing, and so maybe you shouldn't do it. These days, we also have issues with drug-herb interactions, so if anything comes up in terms of an interaction, that could certainly propel the disillusionment. There are certainly a lot of organizations out there, skeptics that will try and prevent the use of these and say, hey, let's not get too ahead of the research here. So all these can contribute to the trough of disillusionment, which is the valley of this. And then it comes up slightly, and this is called the slope of enlightenment. So more instances of how the herb can actually benefit. I see this as we start to see stories. So what I typically see is sort of like a whole bunch of, this is the greatest herb and everybody should be on it, and it is the most amazing thing ever, and that leads to the peak of inflated expectations. And then the stories kind of come out and start going, hey, this isn't as good as you thought it was. Here are some of the dangers involved. Here are some of the contraindications. Here's something that actually happened in the real world. And so that comes down. And then we start getting those stories that kind of say, like, well, yeah, those things did happen, but they didn't use them properly, and this is how to use it, and these are the people who should be using it. One of my biggest issues is always when someone says everybody should be taking something, because that's when I know very few people should be actually taking it. That's a huge danger sign. That means there's a salesperson trying to sell you the herb or the nutrient and has no interest in the actual truth. They're just trying to get as much sales as possible, because there isn't an herb in the world that everybody should be on all the time. There's always reasons for being on herbs. And so as soon as someone says everyone should be on it, we're in big trouble. And that leads to that peak of inflated expectations. And then on the flip side, the trough of disillusionment as they're proved wrong. So it goes into the trough of disillusionment, and then it comes up slightly into the slope of enlightenment. Again, these are articles saying, yeah, this is actually been, you get some of that experimentation and say, oh, no, it doesn't do that. But actually, it shows like it might be doing this. And so those people, for example, it might help prostate stuff. So all those people who were taking it to prevent Alzheimer's, which doesn't show any evidence for, I'm not saying this in particular, I'm just giving some examples. So those people who were taking it to prevent Alzheimer's kind of stopped taking it because the research shows it doesn't work, or some of them do anyways. But then you start saying, hey, it actually helps with prostate, and there is some evidence to support that. And so people who are having prostate issues start taking it. And so that's the slope of enlightenment. It goes up, never again reaches that peak of inflated expectations, but it comes up beyond the trough of disillusionment. And then traditionally in the Gartner hype curve, it goes into the plateau of productivity. This is where with a technology piece, people kind of go, okay, this is what it's good for, this is what it's not good for, and we can use it for this. And it's kind of a stable sort of plateau. It just kind of continues going along at that level. I've renamed this the slight decline of use, because I feel like oftentimes once an herb kind of hits that sort of peak of the slope of enlightenment, it slowly kind of decreases as people who are on it go, hey, maybe I need to save a few bucks, or and new people haven't come on to really discover it. So I think there's a slow decline of use over time rather than a plateau when it comes to herbs. I might be wrong on that. That's just sort of my observation. And in the slight decline of use, we have mainstream adoption takes off. The herb's applicability and usefulness are present, but wane slowly over time and loss of market maintenance. So people aren't like a big nutrition companies aren't sitting there going, "Hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread," like they were on the way up to the peak of inflated expectations. So there isn't as much attention. So I think it slightly declines over time. So this is the rediscovered herb curve. And I think it's really important to kind of talk about this in terms of goji berries, because I think goji berries have been a huge one on this rediscovered herb curve in the last few years. I mean, they just reached the pinnacle, and I think there's a lot of reasons for it. They are really healthy and good for you, and we're going to talk about some of the health benefits of goji berries. But there's a couple other things that I think are really important. First of all, they're widely available and in the whole form. Like, you don't have to get an extract in a capsule and you're not sure exactly what you're getting or not. You can actually buy goji berries and eat them directly, and they're sweet and tasty. There's not many herbs that are sweet and tasty. So I think that, and as we're going to talk about, the first mention of goji berries was about 2,000 years ago. So, I mean, it's been around for a very long time. And so all of these things, this long history of benefits, some research going into it, it's actually saying, hey, some of this might be true. And also the fact that it is tasty and easy, and it's actually a food. You can use it like raisins in recipes and things like that. So I think that all kind of went to the peak of inflated expectations. I think we're a bit into the trough of disillusionment. I don't think we're far off the peak. I think we have quite a ways to go on the trough of disillusionment if it's going to go down as far. So one of the things about this rediscovered herb curve is it's different for every herb. Some of them have higher peaks and lower valleys, and some of them have medium size of each, and some dip lower than others. So it's not easy to know where it's going to be on this curve, but it does give us some foresight into what's going on. So I actually think with the goji berries, we are going to see a little bit more disillusionment, and then it's going to have that slope of enlightenment, and I don't think that's going to be huge, because I don't think it's going to decline too much. Again, there's not a lot of barriers to its use. Like kombucha, you had to ferment it for a while, and now if you want kombucha, you have to buy bottles of it, which isn't cheap to have that long term. So, there's some barriers to using kombucha. There's not a lot of barriers to goji. They're tasty, they're easily available, relatively inexpensive, though I'll tell you how to get them a little bit cheaper. And so that's kind of, I think goji berries are definitely on this herb curve, or hype curve, or whatever you want to call it. And we have a ways to go. So let's get into Gou Qi Zi. So in the Chinese, it's each of, for those of you who know a little bit of Chinese, each of them are third tone. So it's Gou Qi Zi. So it has that third tone going on it. The English translation of Gou Qi Zi is thorny stalk seed. So it's kind of an interesting thing. It is, the Latin is lychee fructus meaning fruit. So this is the fruit of the lychee plant. At some point, we're going to go into degupi, which is the ramulus, or the actually I think it's radix. It's the root of this tree, which has very different properties, but we're not there yet. The standard species is Lycium barbarum L, is usually how it's done. There is another species that is often used for lychee, and that is Lycium chinense. That is considered a lower quality than the Lycium barbarum. So you generally want to stick with the barbarum. Other names for these are lycium fruit, Chinese wolfberries, matrimony vine fruit, Barbary wolfberry, of course goji, and Chinese boxthorn. These are all different synonyms for Gou Qi Zi. I'm going to tend to say Gou Qi Zi or goji for the rest of this podcast, because I'm comfortable with the Chinese a little bit. So the first mention of this was in the Shen Nang Ben Sao Jing, the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica. This is a sort of a foundational text for herbal medicine. It was the first compendium of Chinese herbs, single herbs. And it was written somewhere between 200 BCE and 200 CE, so somewhere around 2,000 years ago, give or take a couple hundred years. It is often put in the category. So in Chinese medicine, herbs are put into categories of their functions, and they're really generally this is put into the herbs that tonify blood category. Though there is some arguments, and in some books it's actually put into yin tonifying herbs. So if you are a little bit familiar with Chinese medicine, blood and yin are very closely related. So that doesn't seem as big of a difference as it might. But so it's very good for the blood. And yin in Chinese medicine, think of them as kind of the body's fluids. To a certain extent, that's a real oversimplification, but we'll stick with that for a little bit. We're also going to talk about, as we get into the effects here, a little bit of yang. So yin and yang, you've probably heard of these in various contexts. In Chinese medicine, they are considered one of the four substances of life. So we have qi and blood, yin and yang are the four substances of life. And I don't want this to be a treatise on the four substances, but yin is the cooling aspect, the fluid aspect, the solid aspect of the body. Yang is is sort of the heat and the force aspect of the Chinese body. And in other words, the not solid aspects of the Chinese body. I think really when we think yang, we think warmth and function more than anything else. And so blood is very much related to yin, as blood has substance, and qi is very much related to yang, because qi has less substance, and yang as well. So that's sort of how the four substances kind of match up a little bit. Going back to Gou Qi Zi, it is sweet and neutral in temperature. So in Chinese herbs, we always talk about temperature of the herbs, and they can be cooling or warming or hot or cold. And of course, they could be neutral. So generally, goji berries are considered to be neutral in temperature, though there was one author that attributes a cooling aspect to it. So keep that in mind, and it makes a bit of sense. Usually blood and yin tonifying herbs tend to be a little bit cooling. Not always, but they tend to be. It enters the liver, lung, and kidney channels. This is sort of a technical thing for Chinese medicine, that herbs will enter different channels as they get processed by the body and affect those channels in a positive way. I think there's a lot of people who might dispute the importance of these, and of course a lot of people who would say that it's really important. I probably tend towards it's probably not that important. However, when you look at the functions of these herbs in Chinese terms, these particular channels are very important, and they're, in some herbs they're just not that useful to look at the channels, but in this case, this herb definitely does affect the liver, lung, and kidneys, so it's important to look at. Generally, in Chinese medicine, a dose is 6 to 12 grams. Basically, that would be 6 to 12 grams a day. I have seen some of the stuff online that says up to 15 grams is fine. I don't think this is relatively safe. This is a very safe herb, so I don't think 15 grams would be an issue at all. But traditionally, 6 to 12 grams is the proper dosage. What are you looking for some good quality Gou Qi Zi? Because this is one of my areas. I've seen a lot of bad quality Gou Qi Zi out there on the market. And if you know the difference between good quality and bad quality, you can actually maybe save some bucks doing this. So first of all, good quality. There are several different species that can be, like we talked about, the Lycium barbarum versus the Chinense. And one of the ways you can look, you can just look and know if it's higher quality or not, if it's the long, flat, elongated shape rather than round. We don't want a round quality. That's usually a lesser quality. So you don't want it looking like a raisin. You want it looking more like an elongated football a little bit, would probably be a good analogy for that. It should be sweet when you take a bite. It should be sweet, shouldn't be bitter. It should be a dark red color. should not be bright red. If it's bright red, it's been adulterated either with sulfur or some dyes. You do not want bright red. And so as soon as you see bright red, you want to think very low quality. It should not be bright red at all. You can, if you suspect that it's dyed, you can actually put it in some water, soak it in some water, and if the water becomes red, then you know it was dyed. And if you do put it in water, high quality, about 90% of them should float. In poor quality, about half of them will float and half of them will sink. And on high quality, there should be a white dot at the stalk end of the fruit. So just look for a little white dot. I don't have any personal experience with the white dot. I can't say I've looked for that, but that's what I've read. And so it certainly is something I would be keeping an eye on as I look at this. So I said, if you know these things, you know some good quality stuff, how can you save a few bucks? Well, let me tell you how to save a few bucks. First of all, don't buy it in the natural food store. They are marking this stuff up a lot. Lychee, goji berries are relatively inexpensive if you go to a Chinese herb distributor. They will probably, with this, they will probably be happy selling this to retail to customers, and you just put in Chinese herb, and you'll find this at half the price, if not less, than you will in a food store, and you'll get more of it. It comes usually in half-kilo bags, so about a pound or two per pound per bag, and it doesn't run that much. It's getting more expensive as the popularity has gone up, but then production goes up and it kind of balances out. But you can certainly save about half. And we are talking retail at the Chinese medical side of things, but it's usually higher quality and it's cheaper. So I'd recommend that if you want to save a few bucks. So in a excuse me, in a Western herb sense, it's used as an anti-aging agent to help the eyes. Now, the eyes are a big thing, so you'll see this a lot. It benefits the eyes from a Chinese medical perspective, and it certainly has that sort of reputation from a Western perspective as well. And if you just kind of go around China, what you'll see is a lot of old elderly drinking chrysanthemum tea with some of these berries in it, goji berries in it, and they drink it throughout the day. They just add hot water to it, and you see it all over the place. Everybody's drinking it. So, and one of the major reasons is this anti-aging effect, but even more is it's said to really help the eyes. And we'll talk about that in just a second, because there's some real good probability that it does help the eyes. It can also be used as an anti-diabetic. It's supposed to help diabetes. If you look at some of the traditional functions of it in the Chinese texts, they talk about it helping wasting and thirsting disorder, and wasting and thirsting disorder is usually translated as diabetes. So in the evidence is both is generally type 2, but when we think of wasting and thirsting, that does bleed into type 1 diabetes, and so it probably has some effect for both of that from a Chinese perspective. It can be anti-hyperlipidemic, so if you have high cholesterol or high triglycerides, this can certainly help. It's said to help lower those, and we'll see some reasons why that might be the case. And it's also said to stimulate the immune system, so it's supposed to build up your immunity. One of the nice things about this from a Chinese perspective is this is a tonic herb, and it is designed to kind of help build you up. Various aspects, and we're getting into a little bit more specifics, but one of the things that's nice about it, it's a relatively gentle tonic that you can take long term, and I'll give a couple suggestions as we move through. So from a Chinese medical point of view, it has three major actions. One is it nourishes and tonifies the liver and kidney. So again, we talked about this enters the liver, kidney, and lung channel. So there you go. Liver and kidney is definitely nourished and tonified here. And we can be a little bit more specific there. And the liver, it really helps liver blood, liver yin. With the kidneys, it helps kidney yin and slightly helps kidney yang. So it's helpful for all of that. It benefits the essence and brightens the eyes. So we talked about the eyes. It says brightens the eyes. That's a translation, so it could be benefits. Some books say benefits the eyes. Essence is an interesting concept in Chinese medicine. The Chinese term for this is jing. And it is, how to explain it? This is sort of the core of us. Essence is what makes us us. Some people will attribute genetics to essence. I think it's a little bit more living than a genetic code. And one of the definitions of death is that you have no more essence. You have no more Jing, and so therefore you're dead. So this is, in a very real sense, from a Chinese perspective, essence is life. It's what, you can make the same case, like you lose Qi, you're dead. You lose Yin, you're dead. It's true, but essence is what helps generate Qi and blood, Yin and Yang. And so, and it's a basic substance. It's given to us by our parents, and it's debatable. Some people say you can supplement essence. Other people say you cannot. You can only conserve it. And there are herbs that are supposed to help, and herbs, and other people say no, those herbs don't actually help build essence. So it's sort of a controversial topic, but what's important is that we want to maintain it and to support it and to benefit it. So this herb is good for doing all of that. It also enriches the yin and moistens the lungs. And so it can actually be used for coughs, especially dry coughs. And there we go. We have that lung channel in there. That's the third and last channel of this. So the liver, kidney, and lungs are the three channels of this herb. You can use it. Some uses in Chinese medicine. It's used in several formulas. We'll talk about one briefly in just a minute. More often than not, though, it's added to formulas. There's not a ton of formulas that it's just in. It's usually added to formulas for various reasons. Many of those reasons are, and we're going to talk about, I keep saying we're going to talk about, but we are. It helps the eyes. That's a real good reason why this is put in. It's a gentle tonic, so when someone's presenting to a Chinese herbalist, this is not necessarily something they're going to be put on short term for an acute condition or anything along those lines, but it certainly is something that can be added into someone's lifestyle long term as a tonic. In fact, after doing this podcast, I drink Chinese loose tea on a daily basis. That's one of my things, and I'm now thinking, maybe I need to get some lychee berries, some goji berries, and put a few of them in my tea to help out. And I'll tell you some reasons why that might not be a good idea for me to do. So one of some of the more off the wall sort of things is it can be used topically, mixed with olive oil or petroleum jelly to treat burns, redness, and swelling. I'm not sure exactly how this. It is a little sticky of an herb, so I think it's probably ground down a little bit and then mixed with the petroleum jelly and olive oil and put on. It can also be used with bimalgan, which is a violet, one of the violets, to treat bleeding gums and chronic hepatitis. This is one of the uses for modern day uses from a Chinese perspective. You can prepare it in many ways. I mean, most often it's used in a decoction, which is heated water, so it's boiled, and then with a bunch of other herbs, and the herbs are discarded, and the tea that's left over, the decoction that's left over, is imbibed. And I think that's probably the most common use of this from a traditional Chinese point of view. Rarely, from a Chinese point of view, do you just eat it raw. And there's some good reasons for this. All tonifying herbs are considered to be a little bit cloying, though this herb is considered to be a little bit less cloying than other herbs. And cloying means it can affect your digestion. So if you have any digestive concerns, especially if you have diarrhea, from a Chinese perspective, you have spleen qi deficiency diarrhea, this is an herb that you'd want to be careful about consuming in large quantities, and certainly not raw. I don't usually recommend that people will eat this raw. I do like the idea of soaking it. You can eat it soaked. You can eat it in a tea. What I really like is there's some recipes, and I'm sure if you were to do a search for Chinese chicken soup with goji or lychee or Gou Qi Zi, you'll find some recipes for using this in the Chinese version of chicken soup. So that's an idea if you want on an everyday sort of basis, adding this into some of the foods that you cook, especially soups and stews and things along those lines. There's some really nice recipes for that. The idea there is that it's sort of cooked down, and all of those sort of things is cooked down. So a lot of the cloying properties are reduced, and it doesn't take as much to actually digest it. And so that would be my recommendation, is rather than eating it raw like raisins, that you actually use it at bare minimum, put it in some tea and hot water and steep it for a little bit before you eat it. Is it bad to eat? I wouldn't say no, especially if you have a strong stomach. And once it's sort of in that, it's steeped, I think they're relatively good to eat, so I wouldn't have any issues with it. A couple other ways you can prepare it. You can dry fry it briefly, and this will make it warmer and easier to digest. So that just means just putting it in a pan and frying it for a little bit. You can also salt fry it, so with some salt, and salt is very useful for the kidneys. In a Chinese perspective, salt will drive things to the kidney. So salt frying enhances its ability to enter the kidney, move downward, augment the essence. The kidney is in charge of that, jing, that essence that I was talking about earlier. So if it's being driven to the kidney, it's going to help that essence a little bit more and make it easier to digest because it has been cooked a little bit. So those are a couple ways you can prepare this. There are a bunch of herbs that do similar actions to goji berries, and so let's get into a few of those. Probably the one that, and I already mentioned this one, is juhua, which is chrysanthemum flowers. And this is, like I said, you go in China and you see people drinking chrysanthemum, older individuals drinking chrysanthemum flowers with goji berries in it. And the reason this combination is really good for brightening the eyes. Gou Qi Zi, it nourishes the liver and kidneys. It's used for deficiency conditions with dry and sore eyes, while Juhua disperses wind and clears heat and is used in excess conditions with redness, swelling, and pain, and they can be used together in mixed deficient excess conditions. So in China, they will usually use these together to help brighten the eyes. So if you're having any eyesight issues, drinking the tea of this throughout the day is a nice way to help with that. Another herb that's very similar is huang jing. This is probably one of my favorite herbs. It's Polygonatum rhizome. It tonifies the qi and yin of the lung, spleen, and kidney. And we already talked about Goji tonifies lung yin, so that's the same as huang jing, liver blood, and kidney essence, as well as gently warming the kidney yang. Combined, this is really good supplementation. It's very broad supplementation, but it's gentle, which is a good and a bad thing. It's not going to have rapid effects, but long-term use of it can be very, very useful. And at low doses, and is used to help the aged and weak in those conditions. So again, just a combination of huang jing and Gou Qi Zi in a tea and drinking it every day or throughout the day would be a nice little gentle tonic to have for most people. The Gou Qi Zi, Tu Su Zi, which is Cuscuta, and Sha Yuan, which is milk vetch or Strega complanati, all tonify both kidney yin and yang, though Tu Su Zi and Sha Yuan both tend toward the yang and are astringent to secure the essence. So all of this helps the essence, all of this helps yin and yang. Gou Qi Zi is a little bit more on the yin side. It nourishes kidney and lung yin with only a slight kidney yang enhancing quality. So these can be used together. But that's a little bit of the comparison between the two. Is Gou Qi Zi is not as much on the yang side as Tu Su Zi or Sha Yuan. We also have Chu Shi Zi, which is paper mulberry fruit, very similar in tonifying the yin and blood of the liver and kidney as Gou Qi Zi. But Gou Qi Zi is neutral, additionally tonifies the essence and can treat coughs by moistening the lungs. And that is one of the uses for Gou Qi Zi, though it's not necessarily the first use I would think of Gou Qi Zi. Chu Shi Zi is cold and clears heat, especially in the liver, that affects the eyes and promotes urination. So the eyes are connected with the liver. And so whenever the liver is affected, the eyes could be affected and vice versa. And so if you have heat in the eyes, you'll get in the liver, you might get heat in the eyes, red eyes, dry, itchy eyes. And so the Chu Shi Zi is probably a little bit better for that than the Gou Qi Zi might be. And Chu Shi Zi also has the added aspect of promoting urination. So it acts sort of as an herbal diuretic. A couple other herbs comparisons: Nu Shenzi, ligustrum fruit, and Sangshen, mulberry fruit, and Gou Qi Zi all tonify the liver and kidney yin. Gou Qi Zi also assists the kidney yang, which the other two do not. Sangshen nourishes the blood. Mulberry fruit, if you're not familiar with mulberry in Chinese, well, we're going to have, there's several parts of that tree that are very huge in Chinese herbology, and also very huge in Chinese history. So we'll get into some of those stories as we go along. So Gou Qi Zi assists the kidney yang, Sangshen nourishes the blood, and Nu Zhenzi does not tonify the yang or the blood, but can cool heat from yin deficiency. So remember we talked about yin sort of being the cooling aspect and the fluid aspect of the body. If you are deficient in yin, which happens naturally as we grow older, especially in women, what happens is that cooling aspect goes away and you get hot. So this is sort of from a Chinese perspective, this is why we have potentially why we have hot flashes. Well, women have hot flashes as they go through menopause. And so Nu Zhenzi is going to be better for clearing that heat from that yin deficiency, that lack of yin, than either Gou Qi Zi or Sangshen are going to be. So that's sort of the Chinese perspective. Let's get into the science of it. Let's talk about some of the what we know about it scientifically. First of all, it is a very safe herb. There are not a lot of concerns around this. I think probably the biggest concerns these days as we're ramping up production is with pesticide use and coming out of China. I think it's important to look for organic varieties of this and go through people who you know are going to be testing for adulterants because this is one of those fruits that can be used a lot. We are starting to grow it in the United States, though my understanding is it is difficult to grow at a farm level here in the United States. So still a lot of this is coming from China, and supposedly the best quality comes from China. So keep that in mind as we go through. It has been reported to have the alkaloid atropine in it, which can be very dangerous at higher quantities. But further research into it has disputed that there's a lot of atropine. Levels are actually so low that one would need to eat several tons before there's even the possibility of atropine intoxication. So that doesn't seem to be a worry at all. It is considered an antioxidant, and sort of the measure of antioxidant capability is called the total oxygen radical absorbance capacity. And I've seen various numbers on this. The sort of the FDA official one said that goji berries have an ORAC, is what it's called, the oxygen radical absorbance capacity, of 3,290. I've seen something on the web that said it was up to 23,000, but I actually went to the FDA website and it is 3,200. Just to give you some comparisons, acai berry is said to have an ORAC of about 102,700. Blueberries are in the 4,600 to 9,600 range. Cranberries are around 9,000. So compared to those, I think the antioxidant capacity of lychee is not as strong as some of the others. You always have to question some of these as far as are we talking about the same species? Maybe they did Lycium chinense rather than the Barbarum, but it's not a bad if you look at some of the vegetables that we like broccoli, which is supposed to be a really nice vegetable. That's in the 800 or 900 range of ORAC. So we're talking about 3 or 4 times that. So it's not a bad antioxidant. It's just not as strong as some of the others. So in my mind, it doesn't hurt. There are many claims about Gou Qi Zi and what it does. However, the studies that I've seen have only been in vitro or animal studies to support them. And I'll talk about in vitro and animal studies in just a second. Let me just go over what these are. It's immunity boosting, as we mentioned, antioxidant, anti-stress, neuroprotective, including there was a study that talked about it treating Alzheimer's disease. It's hepatoprotective, which means it helps the liver, aids the eyes, Anti-hyperglycemic, so that's good for diabetics, and anti-hyperlipidemic, so that's good for high cholesterol and triglycerides. It's also said to be anti-hypertensive. So I saw quite a few studies that referred to all of these. All of them were either in vitro or animal studies. And so, excuse me, in vitro studies that's Latin for in glass, basically. So these are lab studies, and they're not in human beings. Animal studies, again, obviously not in human beings. They're usually in rats, though sometimes you'll see other animals involved, like rabbits or monkeys. So in general, when you look at scientific evidence, in vitro and animal studies are not considered very strong evidence. I think the best way to think of it is it points in a direction that you might want to research more clinically to see if it actually has those effects. So it's not an indication that it doesn't do it. It's just not a strong indication that it does do it in my mind. So I think it's important. I think some of these do add up to the thousands of years of Chinese use. So, aiding the eyes and being neuroprotective and immunity boosting, I think would line up with some of the Chinese functions. So there's that. So it's the evidence, I would say, is not strong for these effects at this point. There was a small clinical study. So as soon as we get into clinical studies, I think we're in much firmer ground. And then we start looking as to what it can and can't do. Then we start looking at the quality of the research, the numbers that were involved, the actual how the study methodology was. So this was a small clinical study from China that showed tumor regression in malignant melanoma, renal cell carcinoma, colorectal carcinoma, lung cancer, nasopharyngeal carcinoma, and malignant hydrothorax. So when I look at that list and the numbers, I don't remember exactly, it was like 73 or 79 patients that did this and showed that there was tumor regression. I'm very skeptical because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different cancers in 73 patients. That's only 10 patients each. This doesn't show much, but anti-tumor is definitely one of the things that are talked about that the goji berries can do. And there's a little bit of evidence. I don't consider this very strong evidence at all. I wouldn't be going out there and saying everyone who's got cancer should be taking goji berries. I do think there needs to be some more research on this, but it's pointing in an interesting direction. So what makes goji berries so useful in all of these things? And so goji berries contain a lot of different constituents. Comparatively, so it contains a lot of betaine, also zeaxanthin, also known as phycelium, and other carotenoids. It has solavetivone, shown to have an antifungal action, beta-cytosterol, vitamin A, B1, B2, vitamin C, calcium, phosphorus, iron, and linoleic acid. You get into it, everyone claims something here. This is what I could find from some of the more reputable websites, but you can certainly find things like magnesium being touted in there. Let's go into a few of these. Betaine is used biologically in methylation reactions and helping remove homocysteine, a major risk factor for heart disease. So the betaine is where we, and the goji berries actually have, relatively speaking, quite a bit of the betaine. It is considered to be sort of that cardioprotective aspect that helps the heart. So if you're not up on some of the recent heart attack research, and I probably am not as up on that as I may have once been, homocysteine has become a big culprit as a risk factor for heart disease. So betaine is said to break down, remove that homocysteine, and that indicates that it could be very cardioprotective. So that's probably why we say it has some of this. It helps in many aspects of heart disease. Carotenoids also called tetraterpenoids, are considered protective of various cancers, probably through antioxidant effects. If carotenoids sound somewhat familiar, if you see the spelling, it's Carot. They were first discovered in carrots, so that's where carotenoids came from. There are two types of carotenoids. The first one are carotenes. These are unoxygenated and include lycopenes. If that sounds familiar, that's what's in tomatoes that are helpful for you. And beta carotenes. So beta carotene can be broken down into vitamin A, and so that's considered to be a very beneficial carotenoid. And then the other type of carotenoids are xanthophylls. They do contain oxygen. And remember, we mentioned that zeaxanthin is in goji berries, and that is a xanthophyll. And lutein is also in there, and lutein is also is present in many vegetables. But the zeaxanthin is the carotenoid. If you look at the carotenoids, those are supposed to help the eyes and as well as have antioxidant effects and the cancers. So that zeaxanthin I can't even say it. Zeaxanthin is probably is pretty major in the goji berries and helps with those aspects. It also contains beta-sitosterol. It's a plant sterol that may help heart disease and high cholesterol, as well as benign prostatic hyperplasia. It's being used alone as helping benign prostatic hyperplasia. So if you have prostate issues, beta-sitosterol is something that's going to be there. A sterol is a chemical type, so cholesterol. There's a lot of those in there, and they're important parts, building blocks of the body. But this is a plant sterol, and it actually helps lower heart disease and cholesterol. Also, in goji berries are various polysaccharides. Polysaccharides basically means multiple sugars, but they can have very beneficial effects. And these various polysaccharides are attributed to its anti-cancer properties. So when I say things like this, when you look at the polysaccharides that are in goji berries and you isolate them, and then you see what those polysaccharides should be doing, and you look at rat models and things along those lines, it shows anti-cancer properties. This doesn't mean that there's been research to show that these particular polysaccharides are useful in the human body. They often will use isolates of the human body, like specific cancer cells, and see if they affect them. But just because something affects a cancer cell directly doesn't mean that when you ingest it and it goes through the stomach and gets broken down and it goes through the blood and it gets distributed or not, that it will actually help fight tumors at that point. So in the lab, these polysaccharides are supposed to help tumors, generally do help tumors, but not necessarily, they haven't been proven to do so in vivo, in life. So, some pointers to some beneficial effects. I just don't think there's a strong evidence for any of this. So one thing that I'm big on are drug-herb interactions. And there aren't a lot of risk factors for drug-herb interactions as far as goji berries are concerned. It doesn't have any interaction effects with cytochrome P450, no interaction effects with absorption or distribution, no protein binding, nothing along those lines that we're aware of. But there have been a few case reports. I found 3. I'm sure there may be a couple more that highlight potential interactions with warfarin, causing an increase in the INR. The INR is a measurement of blood clotting. Warfarin is an anticoagulant. Those of you who are in medicine are very familiar with warfarin. One of the brand names for warfarin is Coumadin. And so if you're familiar with drug-herb interactions, warfarin is not my number 1 drug, but it is my number 2 drug for potential drug-herb interactions. So it's not surprising that there can be a few interactions with even something as benign as goji berries. If you look at these cases, one was a 61-year-old, one was an 80-year-old, and they were on different various cocktails. What kind of solidifies the interaction in these case reports is when they take them off of the goji berries, then everything kind of came down to normal. One case, when they took them off and lowered the warfarin dosing, everything went back to normal. Well, if they had just lowered the dosing, it probably would have gone back to normal anyways. So you always have to take these case reports with a bit of grain of salt. But when I teach drug-herb interactions, I always say don't combine herbs with warfarin in general. So, and I'm not particularly conservative when it comes to drug-herb interactions. So I'd just be a little bit wary with warfarin and goji berries. Though in general, I think goji berries are incredibly safe. So goji berries are in several formulas in Chinese medicine. Two of which the restore the right and restore the left decoctions are used in tonifying kidney yin and yang. So it's not surprising that it would be in there. I don't think it's one of the major herbs in either of those. I think probably the most interesting formula that it's in is a variation of Liu Wei Diwan Wang. Liu Wei Diwan Wang is translated as 6-flavored Romania pill. This is a classic formula for treating yin deficiency. Very classic formula for yin deficiency. Very commonly prescribed, and it when you have dizziness, diminished vision, and dryness, you can add the juhua that we talked about, the chrysanthemum flower, and the Gou Qi Zi, the goji berries, to Liu Hui Diwan Wang, and come up with the formula Qi Ju Dihuang Wan to help with that. So it's basically yin deficiency with some dizziness and vision issues. And that's a relatively common, I don't know about it's a relatively common variation of Liu Wei Dihuang Wang. And I think that's a good formula for this particular herb. We've been talking a little bit about some of the concerns with this herb. It may be hard to digest in those with spleen qi deficiency and dampness leading to diarrhea. So for those of you who aren't Chinese medical doctors out there, I wouldn't worry too much about what spleen qi deficiency is at this point, or dampness. I think if someone is having some concerns with digestion, there's not really anything that I can think of off the top of my head that a digestive complaint that this would be helpful for. So if someone is having some trouble with digestion, this is probably an herb that they shouldn't have. They should absolutely not be eating this raw in that case, or in high quantities. And by the way, I would probably say the same for most dried fruits. For someone with having trouble with digestion, dried fruits are difficult to digest from a Chinese perspective. They shouldn't be used in excess or exterior conditions. So if you have a bad cold, this is not something you should generally have. A cough that's lingering and dry, this might be one of the herbs to consider, but I wouldn't do it in the middle of a cold necessarily. And there are several cautions in various books about not using this, or having caution when using this in pregnancy. There's some evidence that it might stimulate uterine contractions. I don't think the evidence is very strong, but you generally don't, on something like this, you don't look for strong indications. You just kind of go, okay, there might be there. Let's just play it on the safe side. So probably should not be used in pregnancy in general. So that is the goji berry. I don't know what to say. I kind of chose this. I thought it was an interesting herb to choose for our very first episode. It's sort of it's a very popular herb in the general population. From a Chinese perspective, it's an important herb, but it's not one of the most important herbs. So it's sort of a fun herb to kind of throw into the middle of all this. And again, some summary here. I think we need to be aware of the hype curve, or as I'm calling it, the rediscovered herb curve, in regard to the goji berry. That we don't want to get caught up in the hype of the goji berry, because it is very beneficial, but it's not for everybody. Just like everything else, it's not for everybody. So we don't want to get too caught up in this. But if you're someone who's a little bit older, a little bit weaker, if you have some eye problems, long-term, sort of chronic eye issues, especially if they're a little bit on the dry side, this is a very good herb for you, and it would certainly be behoove you to consider taking it on a regular basis. I don't agree with using it like raisins and eating it as a dry fruit. I think if you want to use it in a long term, I think you should think of it as more of a tea. And so put it in with some hot water and steep it, and then drink the hot water. And then at the end, after it's soaked, you can eat the berries, but only after they've been soaked and are sort of a little bit pre-digested, a little bit easier to digest. It's great for adding to soups and stews. That's a great way to add this in. This is definitely one of those herbs that is a food as well, at least from a Chinese perspective. So great thing for you to add in there. There aren't a lot of cautions around this. I guess if you're on warfarin, I would generally recommend that you do not take any herbs with warfarin, and certainly not on your own. That is definitely a place where you want to have a professional help you through that, and most importantly, a doctor be on your side to get tested regularly and make sure that your coagulative levels, your coagulation levels are appropriate. And if you're pregnant, you probably shouldn't take this herb. I think there's a lot of interesting benefits. The eyes are a primary benefit of this. And as we also talked about, it is a gentle tonic that will can help long term in a gentle way to help sustain your activities and your energy levels. So that was our very first episode. Thank you for joining us. We do have another episode coming up. It's actually going to be on one of my favorite herbs. It's Xiaoren, which is Amomi fructus, also known as cardamom. One of my favorite spices, one of my favorite herbs. Again, an interesting herb in Chinese medicine, certainly used and known by most should be everybody Chinese medical practitioner, but again, not one of the top tier herbs. I figure I'll get into the top tier herbs as I go along, but I think we'll have a very interesting episode next week with Xiaoren. I want to thank our sponsors, and I also want you to know you can always get in touch with me at Dr. Greg at spurbsherbs.com. So that's DRGREG at spurbsherbs.com. That's SPERBSHERBS.com, or you can go to our website at www.spurbsherbs.com. SPERBSHERBS. My name is Dr. Greg Sperber, and I thank you for listening to this. The last thing I would like to mention is that if you liked what you heard today, you can go to our website. We have a complete bibliography of all the books that I used to create this podcast. I also have some stuff that didn't quite make it into the podcast. Some added some extra websites for you to go to if you want to follow up and learn some more about this, or there was a great website on the quality of goji berries. If you want to learn more about any of the topics on this, my website www.spurbsherbs.com would be an excellent first go-to on that. And with that, I want to say good health to you, and thank you very much for listening.
Sperb Herbs, Chinese singles.
The proceeding was presented by Dr. Greg Sperber. We would like to thank Janelle for all her support and everybody else who contributed to this program. Thank you.
Janelle.
Timothy
Thompson.
Dobbins.
Roger.
Campbell.